Who are you, my husband? Reading by Ms. Zhen. Chapter 3. The supervisor wants to fire you. Faced with David's sarcasm, Stephen sneered, and without a word, opened the black suitcase in his hand and stepped on red. The sun suddenly appeared in front of David. Here is just £300,000, take the money and get me out. Stephen said coldly. David was stunned, his expression on his face solidified when he saw the suitcase full of money. He never expected that Stephen, a small security guard, would borrow £300,000 after going out for a while. Who is so generous and willing to borrow a few £1,000s for a month's security? £300,000. Olivia was also a little surprised. Since Stephen borrowed £50,000 last month, she has no longer been able to borrow money. She can hardly imagine where Stephen borrowed the £300,000. Stephen is not originally from this city, and only has one friend in this city. His friend is not much better than him, and only a few £1,000s a month's salary. Last time he could borrow £50,000. It's already the limit. Where did you borrow this money? Did you borrow usury? After Olivia was surprised, she stared at Stephen angrily. Now the situation is very difficult. If Stephen borrows usury again, then their family will really be destroyed in Stephen's hands. Take the money and get me out. Stephen ignored Olivia, but looked at David indifferently. David did not leave immediately. He looked at Stephen with a sneer on his face. To be honest, £300,000 is nothing to him. The reason why he has to wait for Stephen to come back is to let Olivia see her man clearly. What a trash, to mock Stephen. Unexpectedly, Stephen actually borrowed £300,000, which made him a little surprised and unwilling. This is his best chance to encourage Olivia and Stephen to divorce. Stephen, you go to borrow usury, how will you pay it back in the future? Don't you know that this will ruin your family and Olivia? David looked at Stephen with a smirk. There is so much nonsense. Stephen snorted coldly, fistfully sealed David's collar and dragged him out. You, let go. David was startled. He didn't expect that Stephen's strength would be so strong, and he suddenly shouted. That's a lot of nonsense. Stephen snorted coldly, and fistfully closed David's collar before dragging him out. You, let go. David was startled. He didn't expect that Stephen's strength would be so strong, and he suddenly shouted. That's a lot of nonsense. Stephen snorted coldly, and fistfully closed David's collar before dragging him out. You, let go. David was startled. He didn't expect that Stephen's strength would be so strong, and he suddenly shouted. Olivia was also taken aback by Stephen's actions, but when she reacted, Stephen had dragged David out of the ward. When you come to the hospital in the future, I will let you stay and be hospitalized. Stephen hummed coldly, pushing David to the ground, and at the same time threw the suitcase on him. Stephen, you are crazy, don't hurry up and apologize to Director David. Olivia chased it out, staring at Stephen with a cold look. David got up from the ground, looked at Stephen coldly, and said with a sneer, Stephen, you are so good. See you tomorrow at our company. He said that the suitcase turned around and left. Stephen is nothing more than a small security guard. Back at the company, he has 100 ways to play Stephen. Director David, Olivia wanted to catch up and apologize for Stephen, but after thinking about it, she stayed. She turned to look at Stephen, with a cold face. Stephen, how can you be so rude? Director David helped us. You don't want to thank others for not telling me, but for being so rude. Is it? Stephen also turned to look at Olivia, with a hint of anger in his eyes. I told him not to help. You have to borrow money from him. What does he think of you? Do not have any points in your heart. Lin Yayun was taken aback, and then angrily said, Stephen, what do you mean? Do you think I'm willing to give him a chance? If I didn't pay the medical bill before, the hospital will let Moana be discharged. If I borrow money earlier, will I borrow it from him? Don't you know that I'm tired too? Olivia is very angry. If it wasn't for her daughter, or if it wasn't for Stephen, she would ask her there are already some nasty men borrowing money? Will she talk and laugh with him? Stephen looked at Olivia, and then said, you accompany Moana first. I'll go out a little bit in advance. I will figure out a way for money. The two often quarreled during this period. It's also annoying. He wants to be alone. Originally he wanted to tell Olivia the truth, but looking at Olivia's attitude today, he suddenly became disappointed and didn't want to tell her. What are you going to do? And is your money borrowed from usury? Olivia asked. No, I borrowed it from a friend. Stephen said, turning around, not wanting to say more. The angry Olivia wants to curse. The next day, Stephen planned to go to the company to resign his job as a security guard, and then take care of his daughter in the hospital with peace of mind. He believed that Thomas would take care of him and he would definitely be able to find Moana soon matching bone marrow. Future Electronics is the largest electronics company in the city, which mainly produces and sells electronic visual peepholes on anti-theft doors. After Stephen failed to start his own business, he originally came here with Olivia to apply for a salesperson, but David said that he was not very eloquent, so he was recommended by David to be a security guard. Later, he learned that David was interested in Olivia, so he didn't want him to be in the sales department. Dongjia building has 10 floors, with a total of 20 security guards. The main work scope includes floor patrol, gate setting, command vehicle parking, and some chores. Brother Stephen, how is your daughter? As soon as Stephen arrived at the company, the security guard at the gate greeted him. The security guard was called Noah. He only returned from the army last year and did not find a suitable job, so he came to work as a security guard. Noah was originally a very mad young man, especially when he returned from the army. His temperament was a bit irritable. When Stephen first came to work, he had an argument with him, and he started to beat Stephen. In the end, Noah was overwhelmed by Stephen. From then on, he couldn't admire Stephen, and it was all of brother Stephen. Although Stephen has never been a soldier, he has practiced Sanda since he was a child. When it comes to fighting, there is really no opponent in the entire security department. Just wait for the matching bone marrow to undergo surgery. Stephen said. Noah hummed, hesitated, and whispered, Brother Stephen, I saw David approaching the supervisor today, as if I wanted to fire you. David? Stephen thought of the threats made by David in the hospital yesterday, and a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. However, he has resigned, and it doesn't matter whether he is fired or not. Stephen came to Richard's office. Before he resigned, he heard Richard first say, Stephen, your 3-day leave of absence has seriously disrupted the work plan of our security department. I asked Mr. Kyle for instructions. Mr. Kyle meant to fire you. Oh, then just settle the salary for me. Stephen said calmly. You were fired. How could you still have wages? You can't even refund your deposit. Richard smiled faintly. He thought that Stephen would make a big fuss, but he didn't expect it to be so embarrassing. It is even more contemptuous. Boy, it's not good for you to offend anyone. You have to offend Director David. Director David is the real power of the company. You don't need to go through any procedures if you want to fire a small security guard. Stephen looked at Richard with a faint smile. Okay, then I'll go to Mr. Kyle to ask. He sneered and left the security room. Although he has inherited the family property, he doesn't like this little money, but no one dares to feed him the money that belongs to Stephen. Looking at Stephen's confident look, Richard frowned, then picked up the phone and called David. Director David, the kid Stephen went to see Mr. Kyle. We didn't even return the deposit to him. It's a bit bad, Richard said with some worry. Don't worry, I've already told him about Mr. Kyle. It's just a small security guard. How can Mr. Kyle take him to heart? David hung up the phone and put it away. On the phone, a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Stephen, you are a trash. What do you use to steal a woman from me? Expelling you is just the beginning. When I find out where you borrowed the loan shark, you will die even worse.